Welcome to the Two Girls with Grief book club. We might laugh or we might cry, but we always read.
The book club where every month we read grief stories, both real and fictional. This episode, we are covering chapters 3 and 4 of From Here to the Great Unknown by Lisa Marie Presley and Riley Keough.
Yeah, so what are your thoughts about these two chapters right here?
It's extremely depressing.
It
It's
is.
really depressing. I like growing up, I remember seeing news about Lisa Marie Presley marrying Michael Jackson. At the time, you think it sounds so amazing. Like, it
Mhm.
sounds like that's the perfect match, right? Like, Elvis Presley's daughter and Michael Jackson, and I didn't know anything about her life or anything, and these chapters really just show how tough of a life Lisa Marie had. I feel like she got everything thrown at her, and she never
Mhm.
got to really just live a good life. She had resources, theoretically, but not
Yeah.
exact it didn't pan out for her because she didn't have the support system that she needed as a kid and as an adult.
Yeah, I think the book brings up a great question that you can be the most privileged person from the most privileged family, and yet there's still so much dark things happening behind the scenes that nobody would know about. And I really think these two chapters kind of like hit on these things that they're unfortunately like universal experiences regardless of background. People experience these things all the time. So like I don't know if we need to like throw a trigger warning out there, but there is a conversation around some abuse that had happened to Lisa Marie as a child. And
Sexual
yeah,
abuse.
sexual abuse. So if that's difficult for you, then you might need to tune out. A darker turn, and unfortunately, she's really young when she's experiencing these things. So we pick up at chapter 3. She has moved in with her mother because her father, Elvis, of course, has now passed on, and she's trying to navigate this new life without her father. And I think, like, she doesn't point it out, but I think, like, the key thing to remember is, like, she's still trying to grieve her dad without any support around her. At this point, her parents, Priscilla and Elvis, are divorced, and so it's just an interesting relationship that she has with her mother. She tries to navigate grieving her father. And so Priscilla, also being very young and trying to figure out like how do you raise a child who is very rebellious and she's very headstrong. And Lisa Marie is, I think, in some ways very inspiring in a sense that she doesn't seem to, I don't know, put up with people's I don't know, like, how to say, like, she's a very true and authentic person, and she lives that way, like, she doesn't put up with people's, like, artificialness, I suppose, whereas, like, Priscilla is very, put together, and she doesn't want to have people kinda, like, analyze her life in a bad way, in a bad light. So, chapter 3 is very heavy in what was it like to grow up, with Priscilla after, Lisa Marie moves back with her, and then it dives into kind of a conversation about what happens when your mom doesn't know what to do with you and she's, like, shipping you off places, and so I like, I thought that was a really sad thing of, like, she needs a parent now more than ever, and Priscilla doesn't know what to do with Lisa Marie, and so she's sending her off to boarding schools a lot, and it was just, like, a really I don't know, a really sad relationship that she's having with her mom after the wake of her father's passing.
Yeah, and I know that Priscilla I mean, I think she didn't have great parents because her parents let Elvis and
Right.
her date when they were 14, and they said that they didn't actually, like, have sex until she was 18, but who knows? A grown man with a 14-year-old, are they gonna tell people publicly what they're
Mhm.
doing? You don't know, that's just, like, what they told people. Either way, her parents weren't parenting her to let her do that
Right.
and basically ship her off to somebody that they don't know if he's a good guy or not, which is crazy, and then you see that cycle continue with Priscilla not knowing how to and just being honestly a horrible parent to Lisa Marie. She didn't protect her. Her boyfriend was sexually abusing Lisa Marie and she knew it and she didn't stop it. She didn't help her. She didn't protect her in any sense. And even in the book, she talks so much about how they were violent to each other and they're always screaming and they're throwing things and how she said that they're like both crazy and they're just psychotic, both of them, and the extreme violence to each other. That's not a great way for your kid to grow up. That's not a safe place for your kid to grow up. And she didn't help her at all. And I think it was a different time where a lot of that was just put under the rug. I don't think you really prosecuted for sexual abuse or child abuse really. I mean, if you look back, there's so many instances of stuff like that happening back then where like nothing happened and it's still I feel like hard to prove and do it today. So I can't imagine back then, but I don't think that it was a great environment for anyone to grow up and it seems like Priscilla never really grew up
Yeah.
and was a very selfish parent. And obviously, oh, this is just from Lisa Marie's stance, but I feel like the things that she allowed is just not okay, no matter no matter what her viewpoint on that was. But yeah, it was just really sad. I didn't realize that was Lisa Marie's childhood at all. Like I didn't really know much about her. I just kind of knew her as
Mhm.
like a rocker kind of alternative person in my head. They're married, Michael Jackson, and
Mhm.
it just seemed like a cool thing, growing up. That's a cool couple and continuing Elvis's legacy and never really thought about it, didn't know the nitty-gritty. And reading these 2 chapters, I was just like, this is so sad to lose your dad, to be dealing with that still, not having a safe person that would protect you. And it just seemed like Elvis was the person that really loved her and would have actually protected her despite all his failings in other parts of his life, that Priscilla was the thing that he would have protected and would have taken care of her. So it's just sad to see, like, she didn't have that once he passed away, and she was left with just people that weren't watching out for her or taking care of her.
Yeah, I was shocked to read that, for one to be a teenager and then be vocal about the abuse you're enduring, and then especially sexual abuse from your mother's boyfriend, and then say something about that. I mean, that takes a lot of bravery for one, but then not to be heard and not to have action taken, like the fact that Priscilla was still dating him, and the only thing
For
she had
years.
for years, and the only thing was all he had to do was apologize to her, and I that really broke my heart. One, as, like, a woman, but then two, to think, like, if that was my daughter, I mean, that man would be packing his bags, shipped out to jail. Like like,
Yeah.
absolutely not. Like, and I think, like, in full transparency, I don't have children, but that's, like, the level of protection you think you would have for your child, and to see that Priscilla, did not have that regard for Lisa Marie, which is that was really heartbreaking.
Yeah, and they said that Edward didn't even have, like, income. He didn't have money of his own, and Priscilla really was the bankroller on
Mhm.
things, which is crazy, like and she let him stick around, and I think if you grow up in abuse or you grow up in a situation, I think, obviously, it's hard to break out of cycles,
Right, yeah.
you kind of have to give her a little bit of sympathy for her not ever growing up and her not growing up
Mhm.
properly. But I think it says a lot about Lisa Marie that she although she wasn't a perfect parent, she protected her kids, and she made sure that
Absolutely.
she didn't continue that cycle of allowing those things.
Yeah.
So she at least, like, had her kids' best interest, even though she still had a lot of things that she was dealing with, she still had her kids back. So I
Mhm.
think it shows, like, you can break a cycle if you want to.
Yeah.
She still had so much things to deal with, and it was just a very depressing 2 chapters.
Yeah, I really appreciated, because it wasn't Lisa Marie who said this, but it was Riley Keough's context in the book saying, when our mom brought around boyfriends, our opinions as children about her relationship were taken seriously and with a lot of gravity, that if the kids did not like the guy, Lisa Marie was like, "Okay, we're done. Like, the kids don't like you." So and I really, like, think that goes to show a lot to what you're saying about the kind of generational trauma and Lisa Marie doing her best to figure out how to give her children the life, a beautiful life and a loving life that Lisa Marie didn't experience as much in her youth. Maybe in her childhood with Elvis around, but after Elvis's passing, you can see, like, it's so rocky for Lisa Marie to try to figure out how to grow up in this environment, and then, on top of that, she's still grieving her dad, like, that's such a heavy weight on her, and then the other things that continue is well in her teenage years, which was just it was just wild, like, I feel like everything that next scene, I'm like, "How could this get any crazier?"
Yeah, and I think seeing where the cycles where Lisa Marie wasn't able to break out of it, like with her dating that celebrity guy that was he 21 or no, he was 30? He was older and she was
Mhm.
14. I don't
Yeah.
remember how old he was, but she was 14, and she even referenced that her dad and Priscilla were together at 14, but they didn't have sex, and, who knows at that part, but she said she did, and she was having a relationship with this playboy that was hooking up with everybody. She said
Mhm.
he had a van that he hooked up with girls in, which is crazy, and Priscilla knew about it, and allowed it, like, basically is like, "Oh, you can hang out together," like, she knew it was happening, and it seemed like at times she kind of tried to stop it, but then not
Mhm.
really. So she
Yeah.
didn't have any protection, and also I don't think Lisa Marie knew how big Elvis was in a sense of, like, the fact that someone would possibly use her and, like, exploited her and took sex photos and, like, sold them, which is
Yeah.
crazy. And at
Yeah.
14 and that back at that time, that was allowed, like, that's crazy. She was 14 years old, and
And did
that
she
no one
remain
protected
friends
her.
with him?
Yeah, she said she still hooked up with him
That was
for a
mind-blowing to me.
while. Yeah, after that whole thing, and that just shows, like, where she didn't break the cycles
Yeah.
'cause she still continued that relationship and still allowed him in her life, and she said that in multiple times, like, she didn't have great self-confidence at all.
Yeah.
She never had that, and it's just crazy that she went through so much at, like, 14, whatever. I don't know how old she was when that whole thing happened, but it's just crazy that, like, a full-on adult man would just, like, take advantage of her
Mhm.
and do that and, like, sell it and just I know, that's so slimy. I feel like we talk about grief journeys and just how hard they are, but, like, I can't imagine this journey, and I hate when people say, like, "I can't imagine," but, like, truly, like, this is just a situation that's, like, so out of pocket of, like, what
Mhm.
you would expect, especially I mean, you hear about horror stories of, like, childhood of, like, Hollywood child stars and stuff, and this feels
Yeah.
like this checks every single box possible that she didn't get away with anything. Like, there's the drugs, there was the sexual abuse, growing up in violence, not protect no parents that didn't watch over her or well, I mean, Elvis passed away. Photos, it's just like
Yeah.
everything happened. Dating an older guy, like, she was a minor. Like, I feel like it's just crazy, just everything that she went through, and she's not even an adult yet at this point.
Yeah. Yeah, it was very devastating to hear, like, this mature man is the responsible party in this case. He is the grown up, like, he should know 100% better, but I think, like, all that to say is, like, what you had mentioned, there's this allure about being the only child of Elvis. Like, Elvis had his own gravity about him himself, and that trickled onto her, whether she wanted that to be her legacy or not. But I think, like, Riley adds into that saying, like, she didn't want all this attention, she didn't want to be in this weird limelight and this weird parasocial relationship with the public that they felt like they had with her, and then these people that were taking advantage of the fact that she was, like, by proximity famous because of Elvis, and she never asked for any of this. You think of another life, she would have just been a normal girl living a normal life, and all these things that have happened. I mean, they do happen to normal people, please don't get me wrong, but some of these are due to because of Elvis's fame that arches over her life, and that's something she can't run from or escape from.
Yeah, and it also adds an extra layer of the fact that it is in front of the public eye,
Yeah,
and I feel like things have gotten better in some ways and worse in others in terms of what the public sees in their connection and parasocial relationships and all these different things, but she really wasn't protected by anyone for how
yeah.
crazy everything was. I think later on, well, we'll go into her relationship with her husband
Mhm.
next.
Which which is complicated, but I also was, like, really happy to hear somebody love her fully and for her to be happy for once. So, this is Danny Keough. She meets Danny Keough at 17, right? And he's, like, 21.
So still
Um
questionable.
Yeah,
Very
there's still it's still not right, but it's better than 30. We're
and
getting
14,
close.
yeah.
And she is a little bit older. They're running in similar circles, they have same friend groups, but it's funny to read about Danny's perception of Lisa Marie as, like, kids. Did they meet at, like, a grunge concert or, like, a punk concert or something?
I th I think
Yeah, yeah.
they met with, like, mutual friends, and they had a few encounters,
Mhm,
and he came off as, like, a cocky guy, but she still liked him, and she gravitated,
mhm.
she said, to, like, alpha males
Yeah.
type, and that's what Danny was.
Yeah, and he didn't seem to care, or he didn't even know that she was Elvis's daughter. It seemed like from Lisa Marie's perspective and then Riley Keough's additional commentary around Lisa Marie's and Danny's relationship was that he just was really smitten by her and her, like, kind of this alternative edginess that she had about her, and, it seemed like for once, it finally she was happy.
So
Okay.
this is where they had a kid, they got pregnant, she had a, ectopic, what is it called?
Ectopic?
Endotop yeah, pregnancy, and then she got pregnant again with Danny, and then she had an abortion, and she really regretted that, and
Mhm.
then she basically trapped him, and she specifically said she trapped him, and she specifically told Riley that as well as an adult that she, like, planned it to go on the ship to see Danny and get pregnant, and she got pregnant, which is wild behavior,
That is
but
wild behavior. She
that
is not logical in
yeah,
all
yeah.
senses.
I feel like there's moments where you're like, you really have empathy for her, and you're like, "Okay, that's great that you did this, you loved your kids, you protected them," and then you're like, "Oh, you." But that's also crazy to do that to somebody, but
Yes.
Danny was, like, on board, but it's crazy how everyone was against them being together, and people tried to get an abortion and tried to scare him off, and, like, just how wild it was because people didn't think that he was good enough to continue Elvis's legacy through their
Mhm.
kids. And side note, Elvis's genes are ridiculously strong. They all have the same eyes, they all look like
Me
Elvis.
too.
So Lisa Marie's son that passed away, he looked so much like Elvis, like, ridiculously like Elvis. Um, I looked through photos of them all, it's crazy how they all have that Elvis look.
Yeah, they all share because Riley Keough has it too, but dark dark eyes, like, it is
Yeah,
amazing that that has carried through, and it was such a signifier of Elvis, that was so much a part of
yeah,
his look, but then to see it, it's like, I look at the back of the cover here with Lisa Marie and Riley is she's a little
yeah,
girl.
so clear that they both have the same eyes, and it's Elvis's
Yes.
eyes.
Yes, and I love that on the front, it's, like, half his face, but,
Yeah.
man, I kept looking back at his eyes when I looked at the back. Yeah, she has his eyes, like, it is crazy.
Yeah, and but her son had Elvis's face.
Yeah,
It's
but
crazy.
and I think that all goes to show in the previous chapter, about Lisa Marie's dreams that she had about Elvis, and that she dreamt about Elvis twice a year up until the birth of her son, and so that's kinda why she
It's
kinda
kinda
had
wild.
reincarnation idea of, like, maybe this is, like, the second chance or and as we get into Ben's story later in the book, like, there is this same kinda, like, familial trauma and darkness that they all share that trickles down in the family. And I appreciate that this is a book that is very blatant about the darkness of their family and the trauma of their family. And I think Riley Keough is doing like her best to make something positive out of this whole situation because it does get, man, if these chapters were sad, it's about to get sadder.
Yeah, and it's crazy because the book, it's not super griefy. It starts with Elvis passing away, which is, happened years and years ago.
Mhm.
And but their relationship, she passed away when he was 9, so, like, you go into it, but it doesn't go super into it, and it
Yeah.
doesn't necessarily touch throughout each chapter, but you
Mhm.
see just kind of how the relationships and Elvis's relationship to, like, Priscilla and, him passing away and his relationship to Lisa Marie, how that has lingered and how that has affected different
Yeah.
generational traumas and different things. But it also has this, like, ominous feeling because you know that Lisa Marie passed away before this book was finished.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so it has an overlying griefy theme when you know that she didn't know that, that she's passing away when she wrote this book.
Yeah.
And that gives it a little extra feeling of like, oh, this is crazy. These are her last thoughts ever about it. And she got her story out
Mhm.
essentially right before she passed. And she always had wanted that. So it was like her last thing to the world. But yeah, it's not super griefy if you're like feeling sad and you just kind of want to touch on grief. It's not
Mhm.
super griefy. It's also not like anything happy fun either.
Yeah.
Um, it just has a lot of, like, I feel like people that are triggered easily, it has a lot of those elements of in their family as everything, violence, sexual abuse, domestic abuse, minor relations, I don't even know what you call it.
There's gonna be
Uh,
drug abuse here
yeah,
soon, there's
drug
gonna be
abuse. Yeah,
addiction.
she does, she mentions, like, drug abuse, alcoholism
Mhm.
in this as well in these chapters, so, yeah, if you're reading this, you're not gonna necessarily feel, like, the super griefy elements, but it's like a gray cloud over this whole story so far,
Yeah.
which is crazy.
Yeah, and in some sense, as I feel like at the beginning of the book, we're getting a lot of Lisa Marie's perspective, and I think that's Riley trying to have respect and honor towards her mom, though towards the end of the novel, because as we already know, Lisa Marie passes, Riley adds in a lot more commentary to fill in those gaps. And so I think, like, also, if you are new in the grief space and this is like a new journey for you, it might make you feel a little seen knowing that Riley has experienced two major losses in her life in two different ways. Like Lisa Marie is talking a lot about Elvis, and yes, that is a very hard and traumatic loss. But in a sense, like the world shared that too, because it was Elvis. Like that's such a different capacity.
Mhm.
But Riley, she seems so humble. Like, I don't know her, but she seems so humble, and she's very different than her mom in a sense that her mom is very crazy and spontaneous and impromptu, and Riley is much more like calm and collected, very, very observant. She seems very compassionate and empathetic towards other people, and I think that has a lot to do with what's going to happen towards the second half of the book in regards to her brother and her mother, her relationship with her grandma Priscilla. Like it's it's just very complicated. So if you also have very complicated families, I think it's a book that acknowledges that you can come from the dynasty of Elvis and be in a very messy family.
Yeah.
Oh. So those were chapters 3 and 4. The next chapters, do you know the chapters we're gonna be covering next, Rachel?
Well, I know the next one is introducing the Michael Jackson situation,
No
but I don't
spoiler.
know that. Yeah, uh, I just looked at the next chapter because I just finished them today, so I just know 5 and 6,
5 and
but
6.
I know definitely no one is introducing Michael Jackson
Stay tuned.
into
For those
the
who don't know, it'll be a juicy episode.
yeah.
So if you
Yeah.
wanna stay in the loop, you can follow us on the app Fable, where it's a book club app when we're talking about the different stuff, so you can hang out with us on there. You can also follow us on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and be sure to subscribe to our Substack at Two Girls with Grief, and that way you can get, uh, bi-monthly newsletters about our different episodes, other people in the grief space and community, and also a review of our books on the newsletter.
Yeah, and you can also join our Facebook where we started it specifically around the holiday season, but it's just a great place if you want to connect with other grievers that are having a hard time, you want to vent, share, etc. Like that is a great place. We'll have that linked to them by linked in our show notes as well. And please rate and subscribe to our podcast. It's the best way for people to find us. If you've gotten anything out of these episodes, we really appreciate you taking the time, and we appreciate everyone that has already done that. So thank you, everyone, and we will see you tomorrow with our next holiday episode.
Yes, see y'all later.
Bye.
Bye.